experience, and Pat Crakes joins us on 365 Sports. Pat, thank you for your time with Paul, David, and Craig. So when you saw that Brett Yormark was, I don't know, predicting, but basically said that there's a chance in the next couple of weeks, and I don't think he meant it just as a, just throw it against the wall and sticks, that the Big 12 could actually expand or extend their current deal moving forward. What was your thoughts, and what does that actually mean?
Well, my first thought, Smokey, was you're telling me there's a chance, and that was my first thought. I think Brett is working the phones hard. I think that he's trying to change the way some business is done at the conference because he understands that the conference is actually in kind of a struggle for its existence. He's trying to steady that with leadership. He's trying to steady that with some kind of short-term direction. He's been talking to the right people, I think. He went out to New York, and there's a lot of important people in the sports media business in New York, and he's working with an important public relations firm. He's on the right track with everything. And as part of that is constant communication with your partners. I know this week I have several clients overseas in Asia, and I have been up at crazy hours talking to them about things. So you always have to talk to your partners. In particular, if you've got something going on inside your entire business that is has already altered its shape and could potentially alter it even further. So I think he's getting as much information as he can. He's getting as much intelligence as he can. He's processing it. You do that by talking to people. So as part of that, I think ESPN and Fox Sports have been receptive to the idea that there might be a way to extend a deal. I think in some ways, I think that makes a lot of sense for the Big 12, given everything that happened with the USC-UCLA maneuver, and prior to that, Texas-Oklahoma, and now, thanks to college football expansion, things have kind of calmed down a little bit as everybody's trying to sort out where the economics are all going and digest everything.
So outside of that communication part, like numbers-wise, must they have kind of already had the idea of what it was going to be early on, so there wasn't so much haggling back and forth on the overall number of what the yearly contract is going to be?
Well, I don't. So I think, any extension would probably add more value to the deal, but I don't know that it's going to add a strategic amount more. It's unclear to me, just how long this extension is going to go for. And, the Big 12 kind of needs some stability. They're in a different boat than the Pac-12. Everybody keeps treating them the same. They're not. Pac-12 doesn't have a contract, and the Big 12 does. And we've got a college football playoff expansion going on, and we may be doing that, here right away, or maybe not. So there's a lot of things to be settled, and there's something to be said for kind of we've got our deals in place, and we're working hard on getting better at what we do under new leadership. And everybody looks to be taking a bit of a breather. So, we're gonna use that time to get ourselves together, to keep our economics flowing, and kind of get past the next 18 months and be able to see what the visibility is out from there. I mean, the distribution landscape that pays all the bills for these things is evolving. And pay TV and the current established system will still be here in 2 or 3 years. And it's going to be required from that system to still support a majority of the economics. I see some of these really far-fetched ideas about Amazon and the Pac-12 that involve, like, Amazon running the IT departments of all the Pac-12 universities. And there's all these crazy – it's like we've got to get past kind of this digestion phase and be able for a conference like the Big 12 to be able to see what the future landscape looks like. Who are the continued players? Who are going to be the new players? Where are the economics coming from that mix? There is no quick pirouette to a different distribution system that gives you really the kind of reach to build a brand, and the economics still not there, despite the success of Thursday Night Football on Amazon, which is unprecedented, never happened before in streaming, and is going back to what levels that are more reasonable every week. So there's some kind of feeling that there's like a lot to you put your property on there, you'll do the same thing. Well, no, you won't, because some of your property is already on streaming, and nobody does any kind of number like that. So you want to get past these kind of false starts, and you want to be able to see out a little further. The Big 12 has a contract, and extending it out for a couple years makes some sense. So when you go back to the economics of the conference, that's not where they're going to really strike in the extension, unless they've come in and said, look, we're prepared to just extend this deal. We'll take a reasonable increase, and we'll go forward 8 years. But I can't believe Brent's looking to do that. I think he wants to stabilize. I think he wants to preserve the value and then look forward to a way to create real strategic value in a couple of years.
What does this mean, Pat, in your mind when you see that Big 12 news? If it is in fact what we see, something announced here in the next week or two with ESPN and Fox. So what does this mean in regards to the Pac-12? I'm sure that's a question you've been getting quite a bit.
Yeah, I don't. So I have. And by the way, if you're just on Twitter, I mean, some of these ideas from very engaged sports fans, I know they think they make sense, but they're hard to process. I think that, if there's some news of an extension, expect it to be a reasonably termed one, right? A couple years.
Right.
I think that I don't think you should be looking for anything super exciting. And I would say that there's probably a good chance it doesn't happen. Okay, I would say that probably. Brett's a salesman, and, he may have a deal, he may not have a deal. We'll see, right? But if it does happen, I can see the reason why, but I wouldn't expect it to be a couple of years, longer than a couple of years. Concerning the Pac-12, they're kind of in a different box. They don't have a deal. They do have value, just like the Big 12. I think they could do a deal. But there's been, the Thursday Night Football numbers from Amazon, the week 1 number was a very good number. But the streaming alone number is about 20% less of that. The rest of that stuff is on established platforms. And every week it's kind of been creeping down. And even with it creeping down, it's still a phenomenal success because, as I said earlier, streaming doesn't do these kind of numbers despite this perception that it's everywhere, right? Because it kind of is, but everybody's not engaging with it at the same time. And there's no sports media stuff on any streaming platform anywhere that's ever done anything close to this. Because if there was, we'd know. So you can't just assume you put your content in behind a streaming paywall and you get kind of like some multiple less of what Thursday Night Football is getting on Prime Video, which, by the way, is going down every week pretty much, and we've got like 7 airings of that, right? So the Pac-12 has got to sort out where it wants to live. Streaming's an option, but I view it as complementary. I think they're a little confused, or maybe they don't really know what they want to do. And the linear networks, are a place where I think they want the Pac-12, but Pac-12 is not something that they have like infinite leverage. They're going to have to figure out a way to strike a deal with their established partners. I know there's some talk about them going exclusively to Amazon. A lot of it coming from people making up stuff. I can't imagine why they'd want to do that. But I also don't know anybody telling me why Amazon would want to do that. Outside of, this helps them with West Coast viewing or something. I don't, it's like, nobody ever tells me why Amazon would want to do this. There's more complete complementary to Thursday Night Football properties coming up in the next couple of years for bid. It doesn't mean that you don't maybe want this, but Amazon's not going to allocate infinite capital to this. They lose bids for sports media properties, guys. So they're not going to bail anybody out. They're looking to find things that complement an internal strategy that we don't fully understand. And they're going to continue to do that. And assuming that they're just going to scoop up any college conferences, right, I think is making a lot of assumptions. I don't believe the conferences are doing that. I don't think the Pac-12 is doing that. But the Pac-12 is going to have to make a deal probably with its linear network partners it currently has, or add a new one, right? But they're going to have to be a large portion of this. And in some ways, that makes it essential for the Big 12 to kind of like, look, let's extend, let's make this easy. You guys sort out the Pac-12, and then we'll come back around to us. I think Brent's thinking that he will be able to maximize value by waiting a little bit. And I think that makes sense, and avoid this kind of messy inflection point where there's a lot of bad data or misunderstood data, and we've got a bad economy, and we've got all sorts of media evolution disruption going on, and and that's going to go on for another 6 months or a year. I think it makes some sense to sail yourself through that and see what's going on the other side. In particular, having sorted out the college football playoff expansion.
Pat, the Big 12 distributed $42.6 million last year to the members, and that was something Bob Bowlesby announced at Media Days. What is, in your opinion, now that includes everything. It's not just the TV and the network deals, because we know that's not near the 42.6. But when you hear a number, let's say of 50 to 55 or 60 million, and I'm just throwing those numbers out there, that's a big gap. That includes the TV money from the networks, correct? Fox and ESPN, if that's who they go with. The college football bowl playoff, which they're getting more now because it's going to be expanded, and also bowl game revenue?
I would think it would have to. But, again, we're getting a lot of different numbers from a lot of different places. The number that matters the most that's going to push this is what national television brings for the regular season games and what you get out of the college football playoff expansion. And, the Big 12 kind of securing a spot in that is very strategic and important. I think in some ways it kind of stabilized all the movement going on. And kind of said everybody can take a break. And then I think the distribution system itself, both advertising, both, the entire system, advertising, sales, and distributors, both established and streaming, kind of said, look, we got to process all these new price increases. You can't just keep coming back to me every week with something new that's 20% higher. So what I would think, Brent's looking to do is he's looking to grab a couple more years, maybe get a bump, and be able to kind of let the landscape sort itself out, and also himself do what he's been doing. I think I really like what he's doing when he's out there, out in front, kind of trying to talk about what brings value to the conference. And I think developing relationships, being aggressive about that, putting your money where your mouth is important. At the end of the day, this is going to be done. The deals are going to be done on the value that the distributors really feel it's worth, right? Both established and new. But, the brand positioning and, how the conference executes over the next couple of years will have a factor in that. And most importantly, once we get past a couple of this kind of confusing time, we get past the college football, we come to an agreement on a college football playoff expansion. Is it happening now? Is it happening later? Who's the partner? This and that. There may be opportunities for actual reconstruction of conferences, additions, subtractions, whatever. There could be some compromises to build value. Right now, we're not quite sure what the value is. The only thing I know for sure is that the Big 12 has value because big-time college football has never been worth more. The question is, what's the multiple off of the very tippy top? And because it's not that anymore, at least in 2 years, but it's still big-time college football. So even losing Texas and Oklahoma, it's probably worth more because that's just the environment, because we have so few less things, guys, in the system across every way to view things, digital streaming, established, pay TV broadcast, that people actually spend a lot of time with. And college football remains one of those things.
Pat, how much, I'm sure you've been in negotiations with entities who didn't really know what they were going to be in a couple years. They were just trying to solidify something for now, which is kind of what the Pac-12 is doing. How much of that can maybe, of them going to the open market, cannot be on the network so much as it is on the Pac-12 of those teams just really not knowing what's going to happen if they sign a 5 or 7 year deal, what's going to happen 4 years into that deal that could change everything for them?
I think term for them is really crucial. They don't need, I think, unless they get a great deal, unless they get a plan from a partner. Hey, let's say some of the crazier Amazon deals, manifest themselves. Amazon decides internally that they're going to overpay significantly for the Pac-12. What looks like would be an overpay because Amazon has an internal valuation metric we don't understand that equals value, right? That's one of the problems with it. I think that the Pac-12 is at it's a very challenging time for them to negotiate for the reasons you cited. Like the distribution landscape is changing. What's the value of a college football conference to Amazon? Well, I think they would be honest and say they're not sure themselves because they're still figuring out their business model. So's Apple, right? But they're not just going to spend money because they have more money, which, by the way, is like the number one reason people always cite why they should do any deal with anybody. They have more money than everybody. Well, they didn't get it. They didn't get all that money by making incorrect deals, right? or overpaying for everything. If you notice, Amazon has bid for other properties recently, and they did not overbid, right? They did. They didn't get it. They didn't come back and say, hey, I'll triple that to get this, to compensate for what you think might be a loss of reach. So we believe we have a new definition of it, right? Same with Apple, which I think is emerging, but is not defined yet. And so the Pac-12 has got a lot of challenges in this, sorting out, are we going to get this, what looks like a good offer for us, right? But somebody's going to want us for 8 or 9 years. Do we take that, or do we take a shorter deal that kind of keeps us together? I don't believe anybody's leaving that conference anytime soon. And I just don't believe that. And we kind of let the landscape evolve, and we come back at this at 4 or 5 years, and we see what everything looks like. And at the same time, we do some more of what Brent's doing, trying to figure out, how we develop partners, how we make relationships, because, when we're a year and a half removed from here, and the college football playoff expansion has been sorted out, there's going to be a little bit more visibility about how much economics are really in the system, and who's really serious and who's really not, and which partners are in decline and which ones are ascending. Because so far, the narrative about that has been really wrong. And, if you go back 5 years ago, Facebook was supposed to own everything. And Facebook is not a player in any of this. So it's a challenging time. Term's the key. I'd go shorter, depending on what I got distribution-wise and economics-wise. But the longer you go, it's exactly what you said, Smokey. It's like we could be sacrificing our future by taking 8 years now, but we're sacrificing 20 years from now. And like the NCAA men's basketball tournament did, which would look like at the time a genius deal. But over time, we've seen the value of sports because people still watch it in a constantly attriting viewing environment across all platforms. Its value should be higher than what it is today.
Pat, how much does it help that you have two networks in Fox and ESPN, if in fact the Big 12 remains with them, that can help promote you and do a great job? Because why would you spend money on a conference if you're not going to promote it? We know what the SEC is meant for ESPN and vice versa. The Fox will be with what the Big Ten is. Does that have a value that you're going to be with two networks that can blow out everything and put your name out, constantly promote what you're doing?
Well, yeah, and let's also recognize that both Fox and ESPN currently get credit from pay TV distributors for having Big 12 football. So a portion of the sub fee for FS1, a portion of the sub fee for the ESPN brand, a small portion of the retransmission fees for ABC affiliates and for Fox affiliates and the Fox owned and operated stations, and Fox owns quite a few television stations. A portion of that is all distributors giving credit for Big 12 football. Now, obviously, that's going to evolve over the next couple of years, but there's still that credit there. So them losing the Big 12 is like, well, okay, so we're going to lose that. Okay, so we got to make it up somewhere else or figure it out. And maybe you think you can with some of your other properties. That's a portfolio approach to content acquisition, and that happens, right? But at the same time, you just assume keep it. Fox could use the games. I'm sure they feel they could use them. And I'm sure ESPN not having the Big Ten anymore is going to have a place for more content, for some content for the Big 12 as well. So there's value being there to the networks with the Big 12. It's not necessarily like, well, we'll just let this go, right? The question is, what's it going to cost to keep them, and for how long? And as far as the conference goes, yes, being in business with Fox and ESPN makes a lot of sense. Those two companies are committed to sports. Matter of fact, Fox is really an all-in bet on the continued survival of the profitability of established pay TV bundles, of which sports are the most important element. So if you're a sports property of any kind, and you're over at Fox, you're really a priority just because sports are a priority. And ESPN is the same bet, except they have built a streaming business that's complementary to it. So, there's a lot to offer the current partners with the Big 12. And at the end of the day, I would think that something would be figured out there, certainly on an extension. I think you could do that. And then in a couple of years, you'll be able to reevaluate the value. And then that, you get that space if you're the Big 12. It's up to Brent to build more value. So when you come back to market, there's something else in there that gets you closer to the two top conferences, the Big 10 and the SEC. You don't need to catch them. You just need to keep them in the front windshield. I keep saying that.
Right.
And it's up to Brent to figuring out how to do that.
Last thing for me is that no matter if the Big 12 was to announce something in the next couple of weeks or whatever it might be, does it matter if they make any kind of announcement prior to the Pac-12? Does that affect the Pac-12? Does that mean anything at all? Or is that really not even something on the radar?
Well, I can't say it doesn't affect them. I know that he's gotten something done that he thinks strategically helps the conference sort through what its long-term plan is, right? I think that's great. The Pac-12 has something unique that no other conference has. They have those late windows for the East Coast time that are, normal windows. They're 7 o'clock on the Pacific time zone, or 6, 8 o'clock in the Mountain time zone. So, they're in many ways, the Pac-12 offers something different than the Big 12. And I think that's important. And when we go back to that portfolio approach, that's why they're kind of complementary in many ways. And I maintain that finding a way for those two conferences to come together is the best way to do this, even though it's complicated. They're complementary. And so if you're a distributor or if you're a network, you do view them as complementary because there's game inventory that doesn't compete for its windows on your networks. And so it would obviously be like, well, okay, they got that done. That's great. But it is an extension. We're trying to do a new deal. I don't necessarily view this as a zero-sum game because they are different. I know that there's a lot of like, this is the Pac-12 versus the Big 12. I hate those narratives. I always do. They're the simplest narratives. I think it's more complicated than that. Because the Pac-12 plays in different windows, a lot of its inventory can play in different windows. They're more complementary than they are competitive. And while there's only a fixed pool of dollars that the networks are going to give, both of them have their own utility and value on their own that doesn't necessarily come from the other one. So, and back to the point about the networks and pay TV fees and retransmission fees, both ESPN and Fox are getting credit on their pay TV networks for having late night Pac-12 games from distributors. Distributors recognize the value behind that. Matter of fact, that drove the last Pac-12 deal. Them playing late, there's no other football, there's no other sports on. And those pay TV games late have a lot of value in the pay TV distribution system. And that's just something unique that the Pac-12 brings. So going back to this, to answer your question, I guess morale-wise, maybe, because now this has become a competitive thing, it would bring them down. I'm sure the media would be like, what's going to happen? But when it comes down to figuring out a business plan on a sports content portfolio basis, I view them as complementary much more than I view them as competitive. And I think it will not impact their long-term direction or short-term direction, probably, because they're probably going to do a short-term deal that much.
So you kind of just answered it there for me, Patrick. But the last thing for me as well is given all, and you've talked about like there's just so much chatter, and some of it's just complete BS, and some of it's actually factual. Just kind of depends on where you're looking. But obviously, you've seen all the continuing expansion talk as far as the Pac-12 schools, and possibly a Big Ten invite one day, and all that. But I guess the way to navigate that, if you're the Pac-12, that uncertainty about how all in your members are would just be the shorter grant of rights, right? Or the shorter deal, and then revisit it in 3, 4, 5 years, whenever.
It could be a solution to the problem. I struggle with how anything, even Notre Dame right now, is additive to the Big Ten.
Okay.
I'm sure Notre Dame is, right? But I need a lot of good business development people to help me figure that out. they've already figured that out at the network, but everyone else is probably deluded. And that's why you've heard some Big Ten athletic directors kind of say, and presidents say, we're kind of done for now, despite the enthusiasm at the conference to do this. So I just feel like we're on pause with expansion. And to your point, grant rights for a short period of time may make sense here. There's more to come. I just don't think it's coming in the next couple of years. There's other priorities to include the college football playoff expansion, which is pretty clear. The presidents are saying, if you guys don't want us to get in there and mess up your business, you better make that happen. And you better make it happen soon. Like, that's the priority.
Gotcha.
So the Pac-12 and the Big 12 get some time to sort out the longer-term picture because of that. And you're right, a short-term grant of rights might be the way to go here.
It seems like that college football playoff getting expansion, which was, again, could be in the next couple of years or so, makes the value of the Big 12, no matter what anyone wants to think, or the Pac-12 or some other conferences and other TV deals, more valuable, because now they're a part of this conversation. It's not going to be just a couple of big super conferences.
Yeah, and that was the fear. I mean, look, technically, if the Big Ten and the SEC really wanted to do this, and they were prepared to be really aggressive and prepared to maybe take some punches to the face, they could do their own college football playoff and just invite people from outside those two conferences. And if they come, great. And if they don't, we don't care. Right? And they could do that. That's not going to happen. So that's great news for the Big 12 and the Pac-12, I think. And it's what's kind of stopped the realignment that was going to end up maybe destroying both conferences. So now, what do? You kind of the dog caught the car. That I don't think is going to happen. So what do we do? And I think you see short-term maneuvers, new deal for the Pac-12, maybe extension for the Big 12, an attempt to kind of get past the strategic issues, to include the uncertainty of the marketplace right now, and then come back in a couple years with a real plan in hand for value creation for networks, for streamers, distributors, and then strike there with the real value. And as part of that, it could include some realignment. It could include some mergers. And because those two conferences have the most incentive to make that stuff figure out, they may beat some of the big conferences to the punch, because the big conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, everything has to be additive. And they are at gigantic. They're fighting the law of large numbers right now. Diminishing marginal returns to every school they act. So if you think about where new value could be created, it's in the Big 12 and the Pac-12, but they've got to figure all of that out.
Patrick, thank you, man. Appreciate it. We had you on a long, long time. We love the knowledge, experience, and insight with what's going on. A lot of times there's a lot of speculation. Some fans want to say this or that, and I've seen them even argue with you and Bob about it, as if they've been at the table. Thank you
Gotta
so
love
much.
Twitter, man.
Yeah. No, seriously. Pat, thanks for 30 minutes of greatness. Thanks for your time.
All right. I appreciate it. Anytime, guys.
Yes, sir. All right, Pat Crakes, Crakes media consultant, former Fox executive on many things, just from the discussion out of Kansas City yesterday, but really for college football fans,